This is Robin Collier of KCEI 90.1 FM, Red River, Taos, and we're here in our big front room studio with Eric Valencia, who has recently just taken over the management of the Rio Grande del Norte National Monument, which is all BLM lands. Of course, there's other BLM lands in northern New Mexico, quite a bit. This is the first time that they've put someone in charge of just the monument. Is that right, Eric?
Yes, and thank you for asking me to be here, Robin. Yes, in the summer or spring of 2022, the Taos Field Office was given permission to hire a manager solely to manage the monument. And I am very, very honored to be the first manager, the manager of the Rio Grande del Norte National Monument.
And it's great. You're from Pecos, right?
That's correct.
So you're a northern New Mexican. You know the history and the concerns of northern New Mexicans, I think. And this monument is very long and stretched out. It goes all the way down to
That goes from the Colorado border all the way on down to Pilar. Yes.
yeah, to Pilar. I'm just blanking out there, but it follows the Rio Grande, and then it just was carved out. It includes Ute Mountain, a bunch of other mountains. It goes right around San Antonio Mountain. And, you know, the BLM, it's before they kind of put this together, it was all this checkerboard sort of, because there's a portion there, and then there's state lands, and then there's Forest Service. And it must be really difficult to administer all these kind of mixed up lands. And by getting the National Monument established, which they started working on it more than 10 years ago. There was a lot of people involved, Rivers and Birds, a lot of conservation groups, the Trust for Public Land, our senators, congressmen, and it preserves that whole area from being mined or logged, and it's a beautiful area. One of the tasks you have is to create a management plan for the Rio Grande National Monument. What are the issues that are going to come up in that management plan?
Well, let me begin by saying, the efforts to set aside the Rio Grande del National Monument was indeed a grassroots effort. The proclamation that overall kind of gives us a good idea as to how we are to manage the monument was indeed the effort of everyone that put this together. Their concerns as to the protection of traditional uses, the protection of the land, all that sort of stuff are all inclusive in the proclamation. The year before the National Monument was set aside in March 25th of 2013, the Taos Field Office had just completed a very, very extensive effort on the completion of a field office resource management plan. They had done a very, very good job in looking into the area that would eventually become the monument and put in some special protections there with the creation of what we call ACECs. Those are areas of critical environmental concern. They have taken into account a lot of the issues that many of the public had said that. So in many respects, that 2012 resource management plan is pretty solid.
Yeah.
In the 10 years that have passed, certain things have changed. We begin to see different. Well, I'm not going to say different, but uses in recreation have increased substantially.
Oh, yeah.
Whether that's an advent of COVID or just more people wanting to get out into their great outdoors and use of their public lands, things of that sort. So what we're really boiling down to in what we call this resource management plan amendment, and that is exactly what
it's just
we're
an
doing.
amendment. Yeah.
We're amending the 2012 plan, for the monument itself. And we're boiling down specifically to those things that have changed.
Okay.
So we're looking at some of those ideas, whether they be the rights-of-way, rights-of-way corridors that we want to, to establish those corridors so that we can keep the rest of it, pretty much or we can consolidate all your rights of way into those corridors, if you will. We're looking for ideas and comments as to how we can better have access to the monument for all our recreational users. And we want to be all encompassing in that as well. So we're boiling down specifically to some of those things that really, really do need to be re-examined, if you will, and if there are any changes necessary from that 2012 plan.
Well, one thing that's increased is, for example, mountain biking, which is very controversial here. The Forest Service once has been pushed to put all these trails all over the Talpa Ridge, and the people in Talpa don't like this at all. And there's, of course, in the Forest Service, it's kind of crazy because there was all this logging over the last 100 years, and there's hundreds and hundreds of, abandoned logging trails. So it's sort of bizarre, from my point of view, having grown up in Talpa, to think that you need more places for mountain bikes to ride. What has been the changes in mountain bike use in the monument?
Well, we've seen we've put up a tremendous amount, and then you've been very, very helpful at the Taos Overlook, and we see a tremendous amount of use by our mountain biking community out there. We also see a lot of use out on the Horse Thief Mesa as well. The thing that I would like to bring into account, bring to attention here, of course, is that the plan amendment really is, a very, very high level plan, right? We want to take into account all the concerns of all our recreationalists as well. It is not necessarily an implementation plan.
Okay.
So as we look to implement, the use of more trails, or maybe even the creation of more trails, things of that sort, we would put together plans for that as well. That would be called travel management plans, or for lack of a better word, just simply implementation plans.
Right.
And at that time, we would do analysis as that as well, and we would, of course, hear from our public and our users as to, how much and how much we would make available to each and every single recreational user, that to include our mountain biking community.
Now, one of the things that when they established the monument was they wanted to preserve some of the traditional uses. So, for example, there's grazing within the monument, right?
That's correct, yes.
And so you didn't, making a monument didn't stop that grazing. So there people still have permits to graze. Has there been changes in those uses?
There has not. And, it is mentioned in the proclamation that there is nothing that, that we would continue to hold on to those permits as well. One of the things that we have as an alternative, and we've asked for comment from the public, is there are a number of allotments down on the southern end of the monument that have not been used for decades.
Oh, really? Okay.
And we've not really even had any applications for use of those allotments, things of that sort. So if that's the case, it's like, do we, want to hold on to them? Well, we want to hear from the public. Do we hold on to them as, allotments, or can we release them?
Well, it's interesting because before 1880, when the railroads came in, there was a lot of grazing in that whole west of the gorge. People would come all the way from Mora and Las Vegas, take their sheep over there, graze. And it's my belief that at that time, they were smaller herds. They weren't the large herds that after the 1880s, the Ilfelds and the Bonds created these huge sheep herds of 20,000, 30,000, because they could ship them out back east. And it was very gentle grazing in that there was always a shepherd with the sheep and moving them. And when the railroads came in and it got severely overgrazed because of the quantities of sheep, and then the Dust Bowl came in and, we had soil and conservation required that everybody in the West reduce their herds in half. And it really put an end to the major grazing that was happening. And then you saw this huge influx of sagebrush everywhere. I mean, I own some land out by Tres Piedras, and I've just pulled up the sagebrush, and all the perennial grasses come back. They're all there. But the sagebrush, because there was a sudden stopping of grazing, have just taken over in some ways. How do you deal with that habitat where You have lots of sagebrush. You have pinon and juniper coming into these areas where there were what is sagebrush. And then there still is all this native perennial grasses spread out under the sagebrush. It's interesting to see how you manage that and keep it diverse.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. It is actually one of those things that we continue to analyze, and there are quite a number of studies as to the sagebrush community.
Yeah.
There are places in the country where sagebrush is actually declining,
Yeah.
which is actually quite interesting. So I think in New Mexico, we're actually quite fortunate that we don't see that,
Yeah.
correct? And it's also one of those places where people will come to see exactly why, the sagebrush community seem to thrive as much as they do. So scientists are working on that, and I think it's a really, really exciting that we have an opportunity to be that area in which we can learn more about sagebrush communities and how they grow and how they expand, and of course how they contract as well.
Yeah.
And what's going on there. I really love that you talked a little bit about the history of grazing and the subsistence and the traditional use aspect of it. I myself, coming from northern New Mexico, of course, had a little subsistence type ranching operation with my family for
Yeah.
generations upon generations, and that whole thing that occurred in the 1920s and 30s, at least in my family, it did, right? And we saw a huge transition. It probably began right around the turn of the century or so, but when that transition from sheep to cattle did take place, we did start seeing, or at least we noticed where I'm from, that the numbers went down
Yeah.
substantially.
Yeah.
And I guess, it's one of those things where, New Mexico in its traditional use in many respects is, and I'll just be honest with you, it's like it became very, very difficult for us to maintain a traditional way of life on subsistence, and having your 40-hour-a-week job and those types of things that really begin to, is taking hold.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm really, really excited about the monument, actually. I see the monument as one of those areas that it is not only the protection of traditional use in terms of education or anything, but it's one of immersion. It's one where we can go out there and we can continue to tell the story of, the centuries-long tradition of subsistence ranching in New Mexico. I'm one of those that likes to say, I don't care how big it is. In New Mexico, it's a ranch, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, of course, and then you have the land grants that overlap different parts of the monument. And the whole way that the land grants were treated, in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the treaty guaranteed that all the property rights would be respected of the Mexicans and Native Americans. Well, that didn't happen. The U.S. government said, "Oh, it's common land. Oh, that means it belongs to the government." Well, that's not how the Spanish land grants were made. The common lands belonged to that grant and the people that lived in that grant to use. And when they took that land out of the land grants management, it devastated a lot of the economies of those land grants. And of course, there are permits like you have with the BLM and the Forest Service, but it's not the same thing where in a land grant that would be managed by the people that lived in that grant. And it's really a problematical thing, and the Forest Service struggles with it quite a bit because a lot of Forest Service land was definitely land grants, and the BLM too. It's a little more. Well, for example, in Budo, the government decided that all this land above the acequia belongs to the BLM, and they literally took the land away from the people that were living on it. It was a huge emotional thing, So both the Forest Service and the BLM still struggle with relations with those land grant communities. The land grants aren't as active up in the National Monument as they are in some of the Forest Service areas. How do Do you have good relations with the land grant communities?
We have been conducting research. It's my hope that we can solidify those relationships with our land grant communities as well. And the RMP process or RMP amendment process that we're going through right now, I think is a huge opportunity to build those relationships as well. I agree with you. I having working for the BLM now, understand the challenges that we have, but I'm also excited about the multi-use mission that we
Sure.
do have, and being able to find that common ground that we share with our local communities and our land grant communities as well.
Well, the Forest Service has made some major efforts to, accommodate the land grant's needs. It's not perfect at all. Now, another thing is that since the establishment of the monument, there's some been wilderness areas that have been added. Tell us about that, that have been.
Absolutely. So we have some very, very pristine areas, areas that meet the qualifications or the standards for wilderness. And those two, of course, have been set aside since that 2012 RMP that was mentioned earlier. So this is one of those things that we really, really need to take a look at, and management of these two new wildernesses that we have. And of course, those wildernesses are out on the western edge of the monument, out in the Rio San Antonio wilderness that's been set aside. And then, of course, the Ute Mountain or Cerro de la Yuta mountain wilderness as well. These areas, of course, are set aside for in many respects. But these wilderness values in a lot of ways are northern New Mexican values.
Oh, yeah.
They are those solitude and, untrammeled and all those things of why we go out and we find our little place to seek that solitude and to, regain our posture, if you will, get grounded back with our environment and, the beautiful land that we live in. So,
Yeah, and that these are important to the Native Americans as well. What relations do you have with any of the tribes? I mean, Taos Pueblo has the buffalo pasture that they have by the Pueblo, but they also have the mountain goats that are out by the Rio Grande. What are relations with Taos Pueblo?
Well, at the moment, we've been doing a lot of outreach with them, and we're we want to solidify any and all relationship. Actually, what we would really love to see is that we are right along the lines with the Taos Pueblo, and they are helping us, not only draft our RMP, if you will, but they are helping us manage these beautiful lands that belong to all of us. Yes.
I mean, there have been talk about them moving some of the buffalo out there, but I haven't seen any movement to do that.
Well, I have to say that I'm unfamiliar with that, so
Okay.
I apologize.
But, that was part of the reason they put those huge, very high fences around some portions of it, yeah. And, of course, that's their land. They, in the 30s, to make up for land that they had lost under my grandfather's administration of John Collier, there was several areas that were set aside for the Pueblo. The one that's right by the Rio Grande, and then another tract that's farther east, basically. So that's very important to their cultural values to have that land out there.
Oh, absolutely. And, and any way that we can cooperate for, not only to meet their objectives, but also to meet the objectives of the American public and the National Monument as well. We certainly want to cooperate in those respects.
Now, how many employees are involved in managing the National Monument? Are you the supervisor of all the employees?
Well, we do have a number of employees. We have, of course, our park rangers that manage both our recreation areas that, are really the face of the BLM. They are out making contact with visitors, maintaining our campgrounds, and all that. We have a realty staff, of course, that manages, rights of ways, and any, acquisitions that may or may not be coming about, things of that sort. And then, of course, most importantly, we have, well, I shouldn't say most, we have our cultural resource staff.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things about the monument, of course, are those cultural resource objects and values that we are really, really looking to protect, for future generations, things of that sort. We also have, in the science, we have ecologists and botanists. We have, our river resources, our river met rangers as
Yeah.
well, and then we have botanists. I mean, we have wildlife specialists, and then of course our aquatic specialists.
Well, you have a lot of river rafting on the lower part of the monument. I mean, it's a dangerous sport, in my opinion, but it is very popular to be able to raft down the Rio Grande there. How many people actually participate in that? And they have to all get permits through the BLM for that, don't they? Or-
Well, our commercial outfitters, indeed, they have something known as a special recreation permit to operate on the Rio Grande. In terms of numbers, I'm not exactly sure. Can't pull that one out of my hat,
Sure.
if you will. Oh, but indeed, there are thousands upon thousands of river users that are both, using our commercial outfitters, and those that are coast are just going out there and floating on down the river.
Right.
In that respect. But indeed, it is a very, very popular and also very unique and challenging form of recreation that we want to encourage everyone to at least have one experience out on the Rio Grande del Norte.
Now, there is camping in the lower part of the monument. Is there camping in the northern parts too? Or?
Oh, the greatest and the most hidden gem, I think, of the National Monument, of course, is the most long-standing, and that, of course, is our Wild Rivers Recreation area out there. And over the last 5 years or so, we have done a tremendous amount of work up in there to redo the campgrounds and to make sure that we have all the facilities, for a very, very quality visit on that sense. So, indeed, the Wild Rivers is one of those hidden treasures. I think that, a lot of people know about, and it's their favorite place, and they come back every year. So some people feel that that's kind of the good part of it. But indeed, I think everyone should go out there and have spend a couple of nights out on that rim of the Rio Grande up there. It's just, it's absolutely gorgeous. And so we got camping in the Wild Rivers Recreation Area and the Rio Verde as well.
And of course, that really affects the economies of Cuesta, for example, to have, and they were big supporters of the National Monument. A lot of people in Cuesta really were involved in that.
Indeed, and we find a lot of support from the local Cuesta community. Our outreach and engagement with the local youth out there is quite extensive, and we want to continue to facilitate that. Again, creating those connections with your environment, right? Yeah. Builds long-lasting and hopefully lifelong connections, but also lifelong stewardship.
Right. Now, one of the main reasons we're interviewing you is this Saturday at 2 p.m., you're giving a talk at the Taos Historical Society, and that's at the Kit Carson Electric Boardroom on Cruz Alta. That's usually they have their talks the first Saturday of every month. And why did you choose the Historical Society to make your presentation?
Actually, it was the Historical Society that came to me, and it's a great honor to be asked by any historical society to give a presentation. I have lived in New Mexico my entire life, with the exception of some 7 years that I spent up in Wyoming. Come from a very, very traditional family. Late in life, or I should say non-traditional student, going back to college in my late 20s. I received my bachelor's in history.
Okay.
Had a master's with a focus on historical and cross-cultural perspectives as well. Main focus, of course, is my beloved New Mexico. One of those things that my thesis was concentrated in many respects on what I refer to as the transformation of New Mexican society from 1912 to 1923.
Oh, really?
So that's, of course, immediately following statehood in that context as well. I've always had questions, and questions as to why we do what we do. Why do we live the way that we live? And for me, it's always boils down to, we live the way that we live, despite our language, despite our ethnicities, because it's really the environment that shapes how we live. So I always look at that multicultural mosaic of New Mexico that is so, so beautiful. That's, of course, always shaped by our environment. So, it's a real blessing to be in a public land agency where, we get to protect these lands for future generations, but also get to see how they've not only shaped my life, but they've shaped the life of generations previous and will continue continue to shape the generations of the future as well. So, I was very, very honored, and I do want to let people know that this is not going to be your traditional historical lecture or
Yeah.
talk in any way, shape, or form. This is going to be more of what I've done for the majority of my career, an interpretive talk.
Sure.
And I hope to provoke and get people to think indeed how the land has changed and shaped their lives as well.
And, the history of the monument goes back at least 10,000 years with Native American settlement. Since the establishment of the monument, what research has been done to document all the different uses in that 10,000 years?
Well, that is one of those things that, of course, is included in the proclamation that research continue to do. I've mentioned kind of the studies that have already been done on the sagebrush as well. We've had some cultural surveys out in there looking at some of the homesteads that were done out there. We were recently conducting some research on one of the playas out in there so that we can get some core samples, things of that sort. So it's continual. The more we learn, of course, the more we understand our history and just the environment or the plateau as well. So there's a number of different activities going on out there. Of course, we continue to do our water quality testing and studying the river and all those different types of things that are ongoing all the time. So really exciting things coming up again with those results from the core sampling and the waters and all that good stuff. Yeah.
Well, my father said that, over in Carson and in that area, they used to take out train loads of potatoes and beans, winter wheat. It was a lot more active agriculturally, and they actually tried to establish a big reservoir on the other side of Three Peaks, and unfortunately, it got drained. There was an underground channel that drained the whole thing, and they had to abandon it. But there was a lot of effort to do, like you say, there was homesteading, 160-acre homesteads, and lots of ranches and farms. You can see the remnants of those over there. And it was, like I say, it was much more active than people realize in terms of agriculture.
Isn't that amazing? Thank you for sharing that, Robin. I didn't know that. But, I always look at that as well. And, when we speak of the aridity of New Mexico and just the ingenious efforts or techniques and strategies that our forefathers had, whether they be the flat roofs or whether they be, the cisterns, however, whatever they could do to conserve water, they did.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we've kind of lost or are losing in many respects, that ethic of water, conservation in many. But yeah, all those different things. I mean, you can see it here in this beautiful vigas that you have on your ceiling out in here. How at one time, that was not necessarily architectural design, but it was very, very practical.
Oh, yeah. Well,
it was meant to have canales so that you can conserve the water and all that good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, the traditional adobe architecture is very beautiful. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up. Again, we've been talking to Eric Valencia, who is going to be speaking at the Taos Historical Society this Saturday at 2 o'clock in the Kit Carson Co-op meeting room on Cruz Alta. And he is now the manager of the Rio Grande National Monument, and it's been very great to talk to you.
Thank you, Robin.
Okay. This is Rob McCullier, KCEI 90.1 FM, Red River, Taos.